I woke up to an unnerving silence. Not the gentle lapping of water, not the faint hum of the filter, and certainly no shimmering blue reflections dancing on my bedroom ceiling. Just an eerie, absolute quiet. Confused and a little panicked, I threw on some slippers and rushed outside. What greeted me was a sight so utterly bizarre, so completely surreal, that for a moment, I actually wondered if I was still trapped in a dream. My pool, my massive, meticulously maintained, and ridiculously expensive backyard pool, was bone dry. Not a single drop of water remained. The once inviting, crystal-clear oasis now looked like a desolate, barren crater in the middle of my yard. Then I saw them. A tight-knit group of HOA members stood at the edge of my property, arms folded across their chests, their expressions smug and self-satisfied. Leading this parade of petty power was Brenda McMillan, the neighborhood's self-appointed queen of unnecessary rules and insufferable micromanagement. She stood there, clutching her ever-present clipboard, an unmistakable, self-satisfied smirk plastered across her face. "Good morning, Ethan," she called out, her voice dripping with a saccharine, fake politeness that made my teeth ache. "I see you've noticed our little adjustment." My brain struggled to process the sheer insanity of what I was witnessing. "Adjustment?" I echoed, my voice laced with disbelief. "Brenda, what the hell happened to my pool?" Brenda let out a dramatic, theatrical sigh, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "The HOA board voted unanimously to drain it. We sent you a notice 2 weeks ago." She gestured with a flourish towards my mailbox, where a bright yellow envelope stuck out like a glaring warning flare. I snatched it up, my hands trembling with a mixture of confusion and rising anger, and ripped it open. HOA violation number 237B, unauthorized water waste. Effective immediately. Fine, $2,500. I let out a hollow, incredulous laugh, scanning the letter as if the nonsensical words might suddenly rearrange themselves into something resembling logic. You actually drained my pool without my permission?" Brenda's smirk widened, if that was even possible. "It's not about permission, Ethan. It's about responsibility. We're in a drought." I stared at her in utter disbelief. "Drought? The city hasn't declared one." "Well," she sniffed, her nose turning up in that condescending way she had, "the HOA has. We must set an example." I blinked, my mind reeling. "An example?" I gestured wildly towards the perfectly manicured, emerald green HOA-mandated golf course a few streets over, its sprinklers still blissfully spraying gallons of water into the already humid air. "What about that? Or the ridiculous, oversized fountain at the community center? Or, oh, I don't know, the fact that I pay for my own damn water?" Brenda gave a fake, patronizing chuckle that grated on my last nerve. "Oh, Ethan, homeowners don't always understand what's best for the community. That's why the HOA exists, to make difficult decisions on your behalf." I took a slow, measured breath, willing myself not to say something that would land me in legal hot water. "You drained my pool," I said, my voice dangerously low, "for wasting water, even though I paid for it, in a neighborhood that uses more water on decorative plants than an entire city block." "That's correct." I ran a hand through my hair, trying desperately to contain the sheer, incandescent rage bubbling up inside me. "And if I refuse to pay this fine?" Brenda's eyes practically sparkled with anticipation. "Then we put a lien on your house, of course." I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth might actually crack. This was the kind of ridiculous, overreaching HOA nonsense I had heard about in horror stories, the stuff of suburban nightmares. But draining an entire pool? That wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an outright, blatant power play. I took a step closer, locking eyes with Brenda. "You know, Brenda," I said slowly, my voice deceptively calm, "I don't think you realize who you're messing with." Brenda scoffed, clearly unbothered by my thinly veiled threat. "Oh, Ethan, don't be dramatic. Rules are rules." A laugh bubbled up in my throat, but it wasn't amused. It was the kind of laugh that came from knowing something no one else did, the kind of laugh that sent a shiver of unease down the spine of whoever heard it. Because Brenda had absolutely no idea. I took a deep breath, feeling the first flickers of satisfaction creep in despite my simmering anger. "Let me ask you something, Brenda. Where do you think the water in this neighborhood comes from?" Her smug expression faltered ever so slightly. "The city, obviously." I smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. "Wrong." Her frown deepened, a wrinkle appearing between her perfectly sculpted eyebrows. "What?" I crossed my arms, letting the moment sink in. "You see, Brenda, 20 years ago, when this neighborhood was being developed, the original landowners didn't sell the water rights to the city. They sold them to a private investor." Brenda's eyebrows knitted together in confusion. "What does that have to do with anything?" I tilted my head slightly, a knowing glint in my eyes. "That investor was me." Silence. Beautiful, weighty silence. I could practically hear the gears turning in Brenda's head, the cogs of her self-assured world grinding to a halt. She blinked twice, then let out a forced, brittle laugh that sounded more like a nervous cough. "That's ridiculous." I shrugged, a picture of nonchalance. "Is it?" Her fingers gripped her clipboard a little tighter, the knuckles turning white. "You're lying." "Am I?" For the first time since I'd met her, Brenda actually looked uncertain. I could see it in the way her confidence wavered for just a fraction of a second, the way her shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. She didn't know. Because of course, HOA presidents never actually bother to read the fine print. I decided to twist the knife just a little deeper. "You know that emergency water conservation fee you're about to impose on homeowners?" I asked casually. "It would be a real shame if there wasn't any water to conserve." Brenda's face paled, the color draining away like water down a drain. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice to a near whisper. "You just picked a fight with the man who controls every single drop of water in this neighborhood." She took a half step back, clearly trying to regain some semblance of control. You can't just turn off the water." I smiled again, a genuine, albeit slightly menacing, smile this time. "Can't I?" Her mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. She looked like a fish gasping for air. I clapped a hand on her shoulder in mock sympathy. "Oh, Brenda, you really should have read the contract." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, silent, shaken, and for the first time in her life, completely powerless. Because tomorrow, this entire neighborhood was going to learn what it really meant to be at the mercy of the HOA rules. And Brenda? She was about to learn what it meant to be at my mercy. The next morning, I sat on my porch with a steaming mug of coffee, watching the neighborhood slowly stir to life. It was the perfect, peaceful suburban scene, birds chirping their cheerful morning songs, joggers making their usual rounds, and sprinklers kicking on in a synchronized burst of hydration. The HOA's prized golf course, which had somehow miraculously evaded their so-called drought restrictions, was lush and green under the golden sunlight. It was almost a shame that all of this was about to change. Almost. I took one last, satisfying sip of my coffee, pulled out my phone, and made a single, decisive call. It took less than 5 minutes for the chaos to erupt. The first sign was the sputtering of sprinklers. At first, people probably didn't think much of it, a slight drop in pressure, maybe a minor plumbing issue. Then it got worse. Hoses that had been left running slowly dwindled to a mere trickle before stopping entirely. A woman watering her prized roses stared in disbelief as nothing but air wheezed out of her nozzle. And then came the yelling. Brenda, the HOA president, had no idea what was happening yet, but I saw her storm out of her house in a floral bathrobe, her phone pressed tightly to her ear, as she stomped with righteous indignation towards the HOA office. Other board members quickly joined her, looking equally confused and flustered. I watched from my porch, sipping my coffee with a growing sense of satisfaction, as Brenda's usually smug expression twisted into one of pure, unadulterated frustration. Then came the real panic. Residents began knocking frantically on each other's doors, murmuring in hushed, worried tones about the sudden water outage. A man in his pajamas tried his kitchen faucet and swore loudly when nothing but a dry hiss emerged. A woman with a half-full bathtub stared at it as if it were her last remaining supply of fresh water on earth. Then, the HOA's beloved golf course sprinklers abruptly cut off mid-cycle, leaving the pristine greens to bake and wither under the scorching sun. The decorative fountain in front of the community center gurgled pathetically for a few seconds before collapsing into complete stillness. Brenda's voice, usually a condescending purr, turned into a shrill bark as she frantically barked orders at her fellow board members, who all looked utterly helpless. She waved her phone in the air as if she could magically threaten the water back into existence. I knew exactly what she was doing, calling the city. She was in for quite the rude awakening. I stood up and stretched, a leisurely movement that belied the excitement churning within me, before casually strolling down the street towards the HOA office, pretending to be just another confused homeowner. A small crowd had already gathered outside, people demanding answers from Brenda, who looked like she was moments away from a full-blown meltdown. "Everyone, please remain calm," she said, though her voice was anything but calm. "We're working on identifying the issue, and we'll have water restored as soon as possible." A few homeowners looked skeptical, their arms crossed over their chests. One woman in a leopard print bathrobe raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "So, it's an issue now? I thought the HOA was all about conserving water." Brenda's eye twitched, but she forced a strained, unnatural smile. "Yes, and conservation is important, but this is an unexpected infrastructure failure." I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Brenda spotted me in the crowd, and her face twisted into something unpleasant, a mixture of suspicion and barely contained rage. "Ethan," she said, her voice tight with barely suppressed fury, "do you know anything about this?" I took a moment to savor the moment, letting the tension in the air build, then gave a casual shrug. "Me? Oh, I don't know, Brenda. I thought the HOA was supposed to handle all our water needs. Isn't that why you drained my pool, to teach us all about responsibility?" A murmur rippled through the crowd, growing louder as people started to connect the dots. Brenda's own twisted logic was coming back to bite her, hard. Brenda's paper-thin patience was clearly wearing thin. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" she snapped, her voice laced with venom. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "You think I'm enjoying the fact that my neighbors don't have running water?" "No, Brenda, that sounds awful. But I will say, it's fascinating how quickly the HOA is panicking now that you don't have total control over the situation." She glared at me, her eyes blazing with fury, then turned to one of the board members. "Get the city on the phone, now." The man nodded and made the call, his expression shifting rapidly from hopeful to pale. He slowly lowered the phone, looking at Brenda with barely disguised fear. "The city says they don't control our water." Brenda's jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might shatter. "That's ridiculous." "Of course, they do." I smiled, a wide, genuine smile this time. "No, Brenda, they don't." The crowd went completely silent, the weight of the realization hitting Brenda like a runaway truck. I let the moment hang in the air, thick with unspoken understanding, before stepping forward, my hands casually tucked into my pockets. "You see, years ago, when this neighborhood was developed, the city never actually purchased the water rights. They assumed they would have access when the time came, but the developers had a different plan." Brenda looked like she wanted to physically throttle me. "And let me guess," she seethed, "that plan involved you?" I gave her a slow, deliberate nod. "Correct. They sold the rights to a private investor." I tapped my chest for emphasis. "Me." Someone in the crowd gasped, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. Brenda's face twisted into utter disbelief. "You're lying!" she practically screamed. I shrugged, a picture of calm amidst the brewing storm. "Check the records, Brenda. It's all there. I own the rights to every single drop of water that comes into this neighborhood." The city never bought them back, and the HOA, well, they never even realized it wasn't city control to begin with. The full weight of the situation began to dawn on Brenda, her eyes widening with a dawning horror. "Which means," I continued, my voice calm and even, "when you drained my pool and decided to impose ridiculous water conservation fees, you were making demands on something you had absolutely no authority over." Brenda's hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. "You can't just turn off the water." I grinned, a flash of triumph in my eyes. "Can't I?" The homeowners murmured amongst themselves, the whispers of rebellion starting to spread like wildfire. The HOA had always been overreaching, but now they were completely exposed, their incompetence laid bare for everyone to see. Brenda took a shaky breath, her eyes darting around frantically as she finally realized she was losing control, the power she so desperately craved slipping through her fingers like sand. "Fine," she spat, her voice trembling slightly. "You win. Turn it back on." I clicked my tongue, shaking my head slowly. "Oh, Brenda, it's not that simple. You see, water distribution is a business, and given how the HOA has been running things, I'm afraid I can't offer the same courtesy pricing as before." Her face turned an alarming shade of red, her neck veins bulging. "You're holding the neighborhood hostage!" she shrieked. I raised an eyebrow, feigning offense. "No, Brenda. I'm simply giving the homeowners a choice. They can either continue paying outrageous HOA fees for absolutely nothing, or they can purchase water directly from me at fair, reasonable rates." It was a masterpiece. The HOA had spent years milking the homeowners dry with endless fees and petty rules, and now, they were utterly powerless. Brenda knew it. I could see the utter defeat creeping into her expression, the light in her eyes dimming. Then, one of the residents, an older man who had been at the HOA's mercy for years, spoke up, his voice filled with a newfound defiance. "You know what? I'm sick of the HOA. I'll buy my water from Ethan." Another voice chimed in, "Same here." Then another, and another, a chorus of agreement rising from the crowd. Brenda's eyes widened in horror as she watched her carefully constructed empire crumble before her very eyes. This wasn't just about the water anymore. This was the beginning of the end for the HOA. Brenda looked like she was about to explode, her face turning redder by the second, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she tried to maintain her usual composed demeanor. But there was no coming back from this. The crowd around her was already shifting, the same homeowners who once feared her power were now standing taller, looking at her with something between amusement and contempt. They had spent years trapped under the HOA's absurd rules, and now they had an out, an alternative that didn't involve paying Brenda's ridiculous fines or obeying her every whim. She took a deep, shuddering breath, straightened her clipboard as if it were some kind of magical lifeline, and turned to the remaining board members behind her. "We're not finished here," she hissed under her breath before storming back into the HOA office, her heels clicking angrily on the pavement. The other board members hesitated for a moment before reluctantly following her inside, exchanging nervous, worried glances. I didn't bother chasing after her. There was no need. The damage was already done, and I knew exactly what her next move was going to be. Brenda wasn't the type to admit defeat, not even when she had already been utterly and completely vanquished. No, she would double down, she would fight back with every ounce of her being, and in doing so, she would only dig herself into an even deeper hole. I let the crowd disperse, nodding and shaking hands with the homeowners who had already declared their unwavering support. A few even asked how soon they could switch over to my water services. I assured them that the transition would be smooth, though I made a point not to rush things. The longer the HOAs suffered without control, the sweeter the victory would be. Inside the HOA office, I could practically feel the tension radiating through the walls. The board members were undoubtedly locked in a heated argument. I didn't have to eavesdrop to know what was being said. Brenda was likely barking orders, demanding they find some obscure legal loophole to regain control. But there was none. The water rights were in my name, legally and undeniably. Even if they attempted to challenge me in court, they would lose, and they knew it. Later that afternoon, I received an email from the HOA's official account. It was a formal notice stating that the HOA would be taking emergency action to ensure water stability in the neighborhood. It sounded serious, official, but I knew what it really meant. Brenda was about to pull a truly desperate move. That night, I sat on my porch, enjoying the cool evening air, watching as a few HOA board members crept around in the shadows, whispering amongst themselves like conspirators in a bad movie. I didn't even have to guess what they were doing. They thought they could bypass me. Maybe they believed that if they called in a favor from someone at the city, they could somehow override my perfectly legal ownership of the water rights. Maybe they even thought they could strike some under-the-table deal with a disgruntled former employee of the water company. It didn't matter. Because while Brenda was frantically scrambling in the background, something else was happening that she didn't see coming. The homeowners were turning against her, and against the entire HOA, at an alarming, unstoppable speed. The next morning, another crowd formed, this time in front of the HOA office. But this wasn't a protest. It was a demand. People were absolutely furious, not just about the water situation, but about everything: the endless, unnecessary fines, the ridiculous, micromanaging rules, the fact that the HOA had been sucking money out of their pockets for years without actually providing anything of real value in return. Brenda finally emerged from the office, looking utterly exhausted and defeated, but still clinging to a shred of her former defiant self. She tried to calm the angry crowd, saying that she had assurances from the city. A blatant lie. I knew, and that water would be restored soon. Another lie. But people weren't buying it anymore. The scales had fallen from their eyes. Then the votes started coming in. In every HOA agreement, there's a clause that allows homeowners to call for a vote of no confidence in the leadership. It rarely happens, because people either don't care enough or simply assume it won't actually change anything. But this time, the homeowners were fired up, their collective anger reaching a boiling point. They had seen the cracks in the system, the blatant incompetence and overreach, and now they were ready to tear the whole thing down, brick by ridiculous brick. I didn't even have to lead the charge. It happened naturally, organically, fueled by years of pent-up frustration. Brenda tried to fight it, of course. She called emergency meetings, sent out desperate, pleading emails, even tried to intimidate individual homeowners into keeping her in power. But it was utterly useless. The votes were piling up, a landslide of discontent. People were simply done with her, done with the HOA, done with the whole charade. By the end of the week, it was official. The HOA was dissolved. The moment the announcement was made, the entire neighborhood seemed to breathe the collective sigh of relief. Homeowners celebrated in the streets, some even popping open bottles of champagne in their driveways. The golf course, once the HOA's prized, water-guzzling crown jewel, was left abandoned, its sprinklers still stubbornly dry. The ridiculous community center that no one ever actually used suddenly became just another empty building. And Brenda? Brenda was the last to leave. I saw her standing outside the now empty HOA office, staring at the deserted parking lot, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The realization had finally sunk in. She had lost everything: the power, the control, even the absurdly high salary she had been shamelessly collecting from the exorbitant HOA fees. She spotted me watching from my porch and walked over, her step slower and heavier than usual. For the first time since I had known her, she wasn't marching towards me with an air of authority. She was just another resident now, stripped of her self-proclaimed title and influence. She stopped a few feet away, crossing her arms over her chest, her usual posture of dominance now looking more like a defensive stance. "You planned this," she said, her voice surprisingly quiet, almost devoid of its usual sharp edge. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my iced tea. "No, Brenda. You did this to yourself." She let out a bitter, humorless laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. "You think you're a hero now? You think the neighborhood's going to be better off without the HOA? I shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible movement. I think people are generally better off when they're not being told how to live their lives by someone who only cares about wielding power. She sighed, a sound of utter exhaustion, and rubbed her temples wearily. What happens now? I smirked, a slow, knowing smile spreading across my face. Now? Now you get to find out what it's like to be just another homeowner. No special privileges, no fines to hand out, just a regular person paying for their own water, just like the rest of us. She gave me one last glare, but it was empty, the fire in her eyes extinguished. Without another word, she turned and walked back towards her house, her shoulders still slumped in defeat. A few days later, a moving truck appeared in her driveway. No one in the neighborhood was particularly surprised. Brenda wasn't the type to stick around after losing control, after being stripped of her precious authority. As the truck finally pulled away, disappearing down the street, I raised a glass from my newly refilled pool, watching as the last tangible trace of her reign vanished. And with that, a sense of genuine peace finally settled over the neighborhood. Valuable lesson: the story highlights the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of understanding one's rights. It reminds us that even seemingly invincible authorities can be challenged when individuals stand up for themselves and their community. Sometimes, the most effective way to fight tyranny is to know the rules better than those who seek to enforce them. What are your thoughts on this story? Have you ever dealt with an overbearing HOA? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more engaging content.